The Irish model of doing design is you step in and you step out of a design contract very quickly. For us, most of our clients are 4, 5, 6 years old at this stage, and we want to build relationships and partnerships with them, so there's a very strong trust with the type of work we do, and we're free to move and then sell that design onto companies in the way we see fit. We spend a long time in our workshop and in our studio talking designs to death, because for too long we sat behind computers drawing it on CAD, and the transition between Sketch and CAD was very quick. And now what we find is that giving it time to breathe and giving it time to discuss moves the project forward so much. So we spend days on end where we just discuss and we debate, and I think it's very important for us to have that room and that space to do that. At the moment, we're involved in different sectors of work, and we have a vision for the next 5 years in terms of what type of sectors we influence. We started with design for primary education on the very left, and we have some very exciting projects in there at the moment. We're continually building on what we call a spine of inquiry. So again, once it's involved with design for applied human movement, we want to be in that space, so it's not just furniture. So at the moment we're working on primary education, so K through 12, very young children. That's where my research would have started. We've launched a product called Ray for Labufa for the higher education, and now we're talking about releasing Ray Junior, which I'll show you later on as well. In the third space for adult work, I think is very interesting. So the soft seating side of office work, I think at the moment there's some problems associated with designing for 2 people and 4 people. We end up with very square furniture, but we don't move in a square way. We move very sympathetically to one another. So we've got some really interesting concepts at the very end I can talk to you about. We've got a very exciting office chair at the moment with a company in the UK. I can't say much about that, but our goal there is to design a fully functional office chair with only 10 components, which has never been done before. So can we get a chair that brings you right back in a recline, in a sprung recline under your own body weight, and right up to it, perch style work as well, with only 10 components. So no screws, no fixings, everything just clicks together and it functions exactly the same way, plus one, you actually get upright as well, you get into a perch. We've got 2 very interesting projects in design for disability at the moment and design for the aged. We have a very aging population that's going to need a lot of care and attention as we get older, because we now have a lot more money to spend. And most of the products there, if you look at showering or if you look at furniture for disabled people, it can be quite demeaning to them, and there's not a lot of personal touch gone in there. Technology and wearables is very exciting. Because of the work we do a lot of laboratory studies where we use sensors and pressure pads to sense what the furniture is doing and what the person is doing on that furniture. So I think wearables is an obvious step for us, so we've begun researching that and we're talking to 2 companies at the moment. In the future, we see ourselves involving projects around sports, space tourism. I think it's going to be an interesting future direction. Travel. And prosthesis, I think, is something that we're quite interested in, because it's an extension of the human body, prosthetic arms and limbs, and wearables, actually, infrared vision and all this. It's happening slowly but surely. So how do we see our role as designers? Because of my background in doing research in academic institutes and also having a leg in the commercial world, it's quite frustrating that some of the best research for design for education and design for the office lives in libraries. It lives on academic shelves. It never gets commercialized, and I think that's an awful shame. We see our role as the bridge between commercial and academic, so we can hopefully work on these projects for several years and then hit them with some really disruptive technologies, really simple approaches to technologies. We see ourselves right in the middle of all the academic research and all the scientific research out there. We do not want to become ergonomists or physiologists or ethnography specialists, but we listen to all of the sciences because they all talk in very specific terms about their own field of research, and it rarely sees its light into the commercial world. And I think that's where we can develop some extremely exciting projects. So since we launched the Ray School Furniture, I guess with the research we did, I think it's very important that we become involved with school furniture standards. So we've made a contribution over the last 2 years to try and change the standards of school furniture for the better. And that's actually pointed us in a direction that we're quite committed to now. That's not necessarily commercial, but we have a mission statement where we want to change the face of education for the betterment of student health and student experience. We also participate in some special interest groups in the UK where we're trying to get a really strong momentum now to drive forward this idea of spending on school children, because we don't spend on school children in the UK, Ireland and the US in a lot of cases at the moment. So when we design school furniture, I guess the big question was, why bother? We should be not really considering school chairs. We don't need another school chair. We should be redeveloping how we experience school and how we experience education. But I guess we can do a huge amount, we felt, in designing the actual school chair and desk, and that was a stepping stone before we actually tackled the bigger area. The main reason is that sedentary life, or sitting diseases as we probably know them, are huge. They're vast. I mean, they contribute to so many lifestyle illnesses that it's very scary, actually, including early mortality, cardiovascular disease, colon cancer, lethargy in the classroom, deep vein thrombosis. They're all linked to lifestyle diseases, and they're all linked to sitting down for long periods of time. So if you sit all day long, you're going to die young, basically. That's the message, okay? So this is my son at 18 months old, Brian. He's a kinesthetic learner. He moves to learn. We found him 2 steps up with his foot in the sink, learning to wash his feet. And at a certain age, at 4 and 5 years of age, we stop that in school. We say, no, your place now is to sit down. So we become kind of an advocator of, look, just sit down, learn, this is how you learn. But up until they get to that age, they're moved to learn, and for some reason we stop that. It's like as if we're on a race to get a young child to be an old child as soon as we can. Okay? And that's something that we need to break straight away, and we need to do something about that. And I think we can do it by not just designing furniture, but designing the whole system of learning and rethinking that. Because the people who design furniture systems at the moment are extremely experienced. They're designing for 60 years ago, and the education system, for the most part, I know it's probably different in a lot of Scandinavian countries, but for the most part, for what we see, it's an old system of learning. And you have old guys designing old systems for new children, and I think I think we can make an impact there. Anybody who's looked up ergonomic journals is quite familiar with the squared human. We have this fascination about talking about right angles for the body, and it's only until we sit down and we experience what that's like. It makes perfect sense, and it makes a very nice drawing, but we really need to stop doing that. It makes it very easy to design a chair around the squared human, but in actual fact, it's quite difficult to design a dynamic chair to allow more movement. So I think that's something that we look to discard as well. When we're talking about school furniture, one of the problems we came upon first when we went into schools testing the furniture was we were wondering why some children were extroverted, some people were introverted, some people were very quiet and loud. You had other people who were holding themselves in a posture like they might have a hunched shoulder or a hunched neck. And there's only so much that a chair actually does to that student. You can give them the best furniture in the world, but if they go home and they're depressed, there's not very much you can do on the postural side for that. So not everything comes down to a better chair or a better system, and we have to understand that it's equally as important to consider the psychology as much as the physiology of the child and the system. So just in terms of slouch sitting and right angular sitting, a couple of lessons that we learned for the last few years. This is old work. This goes right back to the 60s and 70s in Denmark, where A.C. Mandel did some groundbreaking work on perch-style sitting. So slouching happens because of a lack of pelvic control. That's primarily the reason why we slouch. We lose control of our pelvis, and when we lose control of our pelvis, it rotates backwards and it drags our spine with us, and we see that slouch C shape. So we see it right up to the neck as well. When you affect it by putting a lumbar support at the lower part of the back, that does very little to fix the problems associated with slouch sitting. What we should be doing is looking at the pelvis, controlling that pelvis, and then you're able to neutrally balance and you're able to maintain a good posture. So when we stand, we don't need a back support. When we perch, we don't need a back support. It's only when we sit down at a recline and we focus on work in front of us, that's when we need to take regular breaks because of that awful posture. We get pinched nerves, so we depend on our spine to carry blood and oxygen right through the intervertebral discs. When we maintain that slouch position, those discs, you can see that we have a very strong and rigid rib cage, and the discs at the very bottom of our spine, at the very top, they're loose. and we get pinched. You get pinched intervertebral discs. They dehydrate over time. They lose their plasticity, and they stop being, or they gain plasticity, lose elasticity, and become shrunken and worn out. And we all know about slip discs and sore backs and stiff backs after sitting down for a long time. We have a very big, heavy head that when it's off center, it causes a lot of force down on our rib cage and our chest cavity. So we have a huge amount going on in this part of our bodies. I have a lot going on in this part of my body. But we have stomachs, we have lungs, we have a heart that needs to regulate itself. And as soon as you start decreasing lung capacity and the digestive system, we're in trouble then. So we all know if we sit down after eating lunch, you get very tired and lethargic. That's because you can't process the food properly, because you have this big weight that's pressing down and you decrease the amount of space in your chest. Also with lungs, for healthy brain function and to think properly, we need proper lung capacity. We need to expand our lungs, and decreasing that over time means that it never reaches its full capacity. So we're always running at a very limited resource. We also have a very complicated vascular system, so we need healthy blood flow. What happens when we sit down for a long period of time and we're locked into a working position here is that we lose control from this half of our body down, or 3/4 of our body become redundant essentially. So we need to include that more. And we see some companies like Hog with the Capisco chair and some saddle chairs as well. They've really focused on evolving the rest of the body and bringing the lower half of our body into play, which is huge for sports enthusiasts and it's huge for musicians or anybody that needs control of an instrument. Full body experience is very important. There's a few studies that have shown that children now who are 10 and 11 years of age are running a mile, which is just over a kilometer, about a minute slower than what their parents used to run it. That's because now the whole culture is sedentary. It's all about sitting down for long periods of time. We tend to sit on soft tissues because we can't control our pelvis. So we sit on our fat bums for long periods of time, when in actual fact we have two sit bones on our pelvis that it makes much more sense to sit on hard bones. Similarly, when we lean over on a table, we tend to get very bruised and very sore marks on the fleshy parts of our elbows, and it's much more comfortable to use the bone part, because when we start pinching muscles, we start deteriorating them over time, and they lose blood flow, and they squash. Our research in schools showed the marketing shots we all are familiar with. We see kids sitting happily at right angles. When we go into a school, this is actually what we see, and it's quite scary when you're in the classroom, because it's easy to take a snapshot and say, well, they sat there for 10 minutes. They sit there for hours. They sit there for almost half days without moving because they're learning, and young kids want to learn. They're very enthusiastic about learning, and they want to get as much information as they can. They're learning hand-eye coordination. So the interface for a child is down here. For an adult, it's up here because you have a screen, but down here is 90 degrees difference. So they pull their head over their work because they're trying to visualize what they're doing, and they're trying to gain control of their hand-eye movement. So you see that they sacrifice their lower body to get their head over their work, and that's quite interesting. And we sit on reclined seats for the most part. So not only is our desk flat in front of us, our seat reclines away from it, which is just, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, I think. Some of the postures we saw with kids were crazy, and the problem is that sitting isn't natural for a young child to do in the first place. They'll learn to cope with it. Their body repairs up to a certain amount of time, and by the time they get to 9, 10, 11 years of age, they've become used to it, and then their body stops regenerating as it used to. So the marketing will tell you sit at right angles, but in actual fact, what you see in a school is the angle of interface does not allow that to happen whatsoever. It might be good for intermittent looking at a school teacher for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but when hand-eye coordinated tasks are used, and we see that as well with iPads and phones coming in for just-in-time learning, that the interface angle on the desk doesn't allow for good posture. So there's been lots of work done in Scotland with Bashir and in Canada as well, where they took a positional MRI scanner and they monitored the postures of people in different positions. So they looked at slouching, they looked at right angle sitting, and then they looked at perching as if you sat on horseback. And they said by far and away you're much more healthier with a much healthier full body when you open the angle between your thighs and torso. So the angle between your legs and torso is much healthier than if you sit at right angles. And if you look at other studies that have been done, like astronauts sleeping in space, they don't sleep absolutely straight and they don't sleep in a hunched position. They sleep in an ever so slightly perched position where their lumbar is allowed to flatten. So they're able to move from there, okay? So that's one of the reasons why I don't believe that standing all day is a good option. I think moving is the best option. And one of the big lessons for us in the last few years from research from the States is that you can sit for 9 hours a day and run for 30 minutes in a gym, and that does nothing to repair the damage that you do over those 9 hours a day. Okay? It's all about regular, low threshold movement. And now there's more research coming along saying, okay, an athlete who is a sprinter and they're extremely fit has a lot, okay, they're very healthy, but actually if you just reduce the time and you just do an hour a day of exercise with regular movement, it's much better for you. You're much healthier. You can make a huge cut into your daily routine and activities. So in 2006, I started researching for school furniture. I had a design background. I graduated in 2003. In 2008, I graduated with a patented design that was probably the ugliest school furniture you'll ever see in your life. But it was a housing for a patented flexible seat pan. And the whole idea was that we had a height-adjustable school chair. It was very simple, with a backrest. We had a sloping desk at 20 degrees, and we had a little elbow rest at the front. We had a soft rubberized tabletop, because when we asked students what they wanted, they were able to tell us exactly. Their tables were hard, their seats were hard. They wanted furry seats. They wanted armrests because they were so discomfortable. And our job was to listen to them and translate that into meaningful designs. So talking to school kids, talking to teachers and parents is the most valuable thing we've ever done. And what we used to do is go to the schools and then call back. We used to watch students with a sketch pad and photograph them, and then when they left, we would sit in their furniture and actually pull out a sketch pad and start designing from their space, and that was so insightful to do. We had a storage area at the back of the desk for micro storage. We also had a space for macro storage, because children, especially at the younger ages, tend to stay in the same classroom for longer periods of time. In high school, they move around a lot, but in primary school, they need storage. So it was all about the flexible seat. So we have a pretty standard looking seat pan that deflects and deforms into a saddle type seat. So the whole idea is that you sit up higher, and that seat enables you and encourages you to move your legs. And when you move your legs, you pump blood throughout your body. You sit higher, your pelvis is rotated forwards, and you're much more able to engage with your work. And anybody who sat in a saddle seat can attest to that. You don't need a backrest anymore. But we're not trying to push a saddle seat on anybody. It's up to you to sit where you want. And one of the ideas about a flexible seat is you can drop it and you can you can sit in it like a normal chair as well. So I guess part of our job in selling the design was to work with some laboratories in Ireland. So we worked with motion analysis specialists. We tested pressure pads on the seat pan to see exactly what was happening in pressure distribution on the seat. Muscle twitches, what happened on the core muscles when students moved, and also 3D positional scanners. So this is what a student looked like going through the tests. It's quite invasive. You wear a lot of these reflective nodes so we can get a 3D sense. When you see students sitting on it, the difference between the two students is phenomenal. You see one student has no option but to hunch completely over their work in order to focus on any kind of work. That's because the student's optimum visual distance, the distance they need from the work to their eyes, is roughly 300 millimeters. So they need to get their head into that zone, and the only way they can do that when the desk is flat is to pull themselves over the desk. With a sloping surface, that's reduced, and they can actually maintain a healthy posture for a longer period of time. And what we found was that the lower part of their body came into play so much. They started twitching their legs, and almost like they were cycling a bike, they started moving their legs more and more. This is what we saw on the pressure pad. So on the left, on your left, you see the perch seat. So the The red zones indicate a very small area of force, and that's where your bones are, the sit bones. So that's what we want to see. And from those sit bones out, we see a dissipation of pressure, so an even distribution of pressure from your sit bones through the bottom half of your legs. Okay? That means that the pelvis is pointed down, so we're making contact with two local points on the pelvis. And on the right-hand side, on a traditional school chair with a recline, you can see the shape of the pelvis is rotating backwards in their sacral sitting. So we know now that if the pelvis is rotated backwards, the student has very poor control on the backrest on their spine, so they depend on the backrest more and more. You also see a spiking on the back of the chair. That shows that they're not comfortable on the chair. It's either too long for them or they're just losing control of their legs. So we had a very exciting partnership with Labufa, and in 2009 we met by chance Hans Tuga and his studio, and I think Jens is here as well today, and we struck up a very good relationship that lasted 3-4 years, and it still continues to this day. And we spent many years working on continuing that level of research. We brought the furniture into a school and we did very long 2-month longitudinal tests without any sensors. We asked the students and teachers, and we worked with them in large groups for a long time. And we launched Ray in 2012. So it's a really exciting project because it actually gets rid of the ugly designs that we had and brings it into a chair design that looks quite beautiful and quite acceptable, I guess. So we have a sloping work surface again, and that sloping work surface is adjustable, so you can adjust it to flat as well. So I'm sure you've probably seen it on the fair as well. And if you haven't sat in it already, please do go and check it out, because it's a new way to experience sitting, I think. So in the last year, we've been sitting on them in offices for a long time, and I guess my own research, we had a cantilever version, which was really nice because it gave you a lot of movement and bounce on the cantilever. And it's something that we would never sell 5-star bases or gas levers in the UK or in Ireland. It's just a steel frame is what they come to expect. And the problem is, how do you get the UK and Ireland and the US to appreciate better design, better ergonomics, when the cost is a little bit higher than what they're used to paying? They used to pay £15 for a school chair, which is crazy. I mean, you can buy a lunchbox for £15, okay? And we expect a chair to last for I don't know how many years. One thing we found is we have a very scratchy logo, Perch. And the reason for that is when I went back to visit my old school that I studied in, I found my own name scratched into my desk from 20 years before that. So that just shows you that a £20 or a €20 piece of furniture lasts for 25, 30 years. It's less than €1 per year, and we expect so much from that. So we're making Ray Junior. We're going to launch it at the Milan Furniture Week, and we're really quite excited about it. It's as simple as we can get. So in some of the projects we're doing, we have a race to zero. We're trying to race the amount of components down to zero, and we have to stop somewhere along the way. But what we expect from that small amount of components is an increased function. So how can we get an increased function out of this chair? Well, we can actually do it by cutting off the backrests because the pelvis is stabilized, and it's really quite a beautiful sit on it. So these are renderings. As I said, we have a prototype coming at Milan. We've included a little footrail on the front, so a smaller school child or a larger school child can put 1 or 2 feet there at a time while they look on a 5-degree slope for the desk. We now know that 15 degrees or 20 degrees of a desk just won't sell. If it's better for the child, it doesn't matter, it will not sell, and it's been tried and tested. We think a 5-degree slope still is better because you now have a sloping forward, an effect of a sloping forward chair. So a sloping forward by 5 degrees desk is actually quite enjoyable to work on. The chair is as reduced as you can get. It's very light. There's no reason you need a backrest on this chair whatsoever. So we have a few innovations on the desk that I'd like to talk about as well. So the 5-degree slope here, for group work, a lot of teachers and a lot of students have said, oh, we'd like a flat desk as well. So we've found that by putting an adjustable foot at the very front of the cantilever that you can just kick down, that negates the 5-degree slope. and you're able to flatten the desk off. So it's a really simple innovation. It's hidden within the tubes. You don't know it's there until it's there. There's no levers. You just kick it with your foot, and there you go. It's cantilevered, so there's no problem getting in or getting out of the chair or desk, because we see quite often you have to move your chair back. There's a school bag here. You can't get over it, so students tend to sit down for longer. This enables a lot more freedom of movement. So you get an effective height adjustment on the desk by angling it as well, maybe 50 millimeters of height adjustment. It's stackable. The chair is stackable. It's very easy to stow. You don't need a metal tray underneath. You can just pop it on top of the desk. There's 2 rubber grommets underneath. In normal circumstances, there would be no way that you could have 2 people with the same height sitting at the same height of static chair, okay? Because the way chairs are designed, regular chairs, they're designed to your popliteal height. So to the back of your knee dictates how high a chair is. But when the chair deforms underneath you and forms a saddle chair, that doesn't dictate how high a chair should be anymore. So I can sit a little lower than I would like to, and somebody can sit a little higher than they like to, while still being comfortable on a saddle-type chair, which is what we see here. So 2 people of great difference in height between them can sit at the same chair height. Once we put in the foot rail onto that chair as well, it allows a lot more adjustability. So we've effectively, with almost no components, got a chair that has height adjustability and a desk as well that has angle and height adjustability. So a few years ago, 4 years ago, when I started Perch First, we also wrote a European project for FP7, and we won 1.3 million euros to research into the future of education, because we realized ourselves that it's not all about school furniture. We have to consider spaces, we have to consider psychology, we have to consider architecture. They all have to join together to create a global vision for how schools should be designed. That's been a very exciting project. It just finished up into some really, really interesting research. I guess it's our commitment to research and academic research. But we had VS, who are a German school furniture company, as partners. We had some architects in the States who had done some amazing work in United Arab Emirates, 300 million euro schools. So they had a lot to contribute about breaking down the classic norms about school furniture design. We're also involved with Arduino and CID in Copenhagen, the interaction school. And the whole topic there is design for STEM learning and STEAM learning. So for science, tech, engineering, and maths. There's a great unknown at the moment about how children should learn in the space that they occupy. And that's a really exciting. There's 13 European projects. It's a 3 million euro European project, and we're just at the start of that. So at the moment, we're prototyping new ways to experience the maker community, the hacker community, how we build robots, how we build new pieces of technology. So we're building sensors into the table that learn and give feedback to the student. We have capacitive sensors on the desk. We have an RGBD camera looking down from above, so it captures motion of the students' hand movements. We can identify the students, and we can also project down onto that table. So it really is a kind of a full loop that we're creating for them. We're creating new tasks that they get feedback from the furniture itself, so they're actually enthusiastic about working. It's a standing-only version, and at the back of the table, we have a whiteboard that can flip around. So for somebody coding, it's common to everybody. It's not just on a laptop anymore. It's right there in front of you, and that can flip around. So we're trying to encourage more self-directed learning and group work rather than just single-focus work. We're also involved in a very exciting project in Ireland called Tip Tap Tap. So this is for young children of 6, 7, 8 years of age who are learning to read and write. This is a capacitive desk that you can touch, and the feedback goes to the whiteboard, and the common teacher knows exactly when a student is learning to read and write. The beautiful thing about this is it's very low-key technology, and it allows you to put a book down on the table, and that book then becomes capacitive as well. So it projects right through the book, and it identifies where the book is. I think that's going to be a really exciting technology. So our first lesson when we started designing for school children was to not consider the school child as if they were just a small adult. That was number one thing we were told. And through the years, as we've started looking in offices and we've started looking at just design for work, this is where offices used to be, very cubicle-based, very static, quite boring. Now we see the big companies, they're treating their employees as if they were children. They're putting playgrounds in and slides in, and they're trying to encourage continuous movement while we do nothing for them in schools. Okay? And I think one of the big problems we have at the moment is that school children, in the eyes of the law, are not treated like workers in the school. They're treated like visitors. So they don't require adjustable furniture. They don't require, maybe it's a little different. I think it's the same in Scandinavia. It's absolutely the same in the UK and Ireland and in the US as well, which is heresy. I mean, it's causing so much damage. So we have debates on the school furniture standards panel about how to design a better ergonomic static four-legged chair. You can't do that. It has to be dynamic. But because we don't owe it to the children to provide them with adjustable furniture, and we only talk about it on a cost basis, we don't look after our children the same way. My argument is now that maybe we should start looking at children as if they were small adults and treating them the same way. We need to change that before we change anything. This is how schools were like 60 years ago. This is what schools are like now. Even the top, I know Steelcase have done an amazing job on a one-piece chair with storage, but we're still talking about school furniture on a chair and desk basis. And it makes me guilty as a chair designer that we're still talking about that. There's been global calls. I'm sure if anybody's watched TED, you've seen Ken Robinson talk for a better education system. Why are we not teaching ballet the same way we're teaching maths? And that's a very valid question. Jobs are now changing. We probably won't have accountants. I have a 3.5-year-old. He's going to retire in 2085. I don't know what job he's going to retire from, but he probably won't need the same sets of skills that we're teaching now in schools. We have Solomon Khan, Khan Academy. That's a very progressive way to learn and experience education. Bill Gates has done a huge amount in the Gates Foundation for teacher-centric. He thinks teachers are the future, and I absolutely agree. Sugata Mitra has done a huge amount in terms of student-centric learning and self-directed learning, where the teacher plays a different role completely to just telling the students what they should learn. Students are self-directed. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi about involving creative flow, and where children actually experience that flow of creativity instead of just learning by rote. And Finland, there's been a very interesting publications out in the last few weeks about Finland are about to get rid of learning by subjects, and they're now saying we should embrace topic-based learning rather than subject-based learning, which fundamentally changes the way we experience and teach subject matters, and I think that's going to be very exciting as well. So I guess in designing for education, our one message would be, don't look at the school furniture as the solution. We should be designing the incentives, because we need to convince governments that they need to spend more money in order to get better results. And it's not an expense, it's an investment in the future for school children, because you will die early if you sit down and don't contribute. So just finishing up, we're involved in an exciting project with an Irish company at the moment. Because of the work we're doing, we're always interested in monitoring people and their activities and, I guess, one-to-one communications. And one of the things that happened to us quite early on in this project was we started looking at cafes and meeting areas, informal meeting areas where people congregated and formed small groups. And we noticed that nobody sits directly in front of each other having a casual conversation. We stand at an angle to one another, and we express our bodies, especially when we stand up, in a unique way. Yet we see a lot of soft seating solutions designed for square situations. So we sit directly opposite each other, and then we move. But we move, and the furniture is not sympathetic to that. And I think it's because we'd start designing for 2s and 4s. Okay? So we took a unique approach, and if anybody's familiar with the Fibonacci sequence, it's 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21. We started looking at that as the I guess the driver for groups of people. So 1, 2, 3, and 5 is a particularly interesting group of people. And we said design for concepts of urbanism was an exciting space to be in. So monitoring people outside of the photographs, just sitting there and actually sketching them and their body positions was very interesting, and seeing the positions that they move in. We also started to note that people have a regular amount of meeting items they bring with them. So for a 1-hour meeting, you generally have a notepad, a cup of coffee, a phone, a laptop, and you bring them to the meeting. But very often you'd see that the meeting table doesn't cater for that kit that you bring with you. So we said, well, this is very important. And if you look around the room at anybody sitting down, you generally do something with your elbows. You generally don't sit like this. So elbows dictate where our body moves to and where it moves around. So an elbow rest is vitally important for anybody sitting down. So we started looking at these postures, looking at two different people, an introvert and extrovert sitting down, and what they bring to the kit. And then we started saying, well, how do we go from a normal seat, include that space, grow that space out to the maximum size, then shrink it right back down again. And then the last slide on the bottom right, what about if we had a floating armrest that you can rotate around, so it's actually an elbow rest and a working pad at the same time? That means that we have to float the armrest off the seat. So we call the project Float, and we're releasing it at Milan this year. It's really quite exciting. So this is what it looks like. It's hexagonal in form. It has a floating armrest and these 4 petals on it, hexagonal in form, so you can join 3 of them around in a circle. There's no front or back to this chair because the seat swivels. Okay? The seat is cantilevered, so when you sit back into it, it reclines you. When you sit forward into it and turn around the other way, it actually perches you forward in a really nice way. There's 2 wheels at the back, so you can move it around. It's very light. 3 of them together. 2 people can turn around from each other and work away, or they can face each other. The armrest is quite significant. It's upholstered, it's nice and soft, but quite firm. And then you can turn right around. There's no legs to get in your way, it floats. And I just want to get to the overhead shot as well. So for 3 people, you can actually look at the same screen, which is quite exciting. And that's it from above. So that's our work. If anybody's going to Milan, have a look out for it. It's in Zona Tortona. We're currently talking to, actually, Holmris have indicated an interest in the project, so we're really quite excited about that as well. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, we're happy to hear them.